There has been a lot of questions come in, so thank you. Right, to kick things off, James, I'll come to you. The BVA have published figures this morning which show that 9 in 10 companion animal vets are worried about the inability to treat infections in the face of antimicrobial resistance, while 77% are concerned about the inability to control surgical infections. What do you think are the main reasons behind this? And are there any lessons that can be taken from the experiences of the farming veterinary sector to help address this?
I think as a profession and as industry, but farming industry as well as the veterinary profession, we can really stand proud with what we've already achieved through our sort of voluntary approach to reducing antibiotic usage or antimicrobial usage. But we've done that because we've recognised that if we don't do something, there's going to be a huge challenge around the corner in terms of resistance. And I think what we're seeing now is both our colleagues in small animal practice, but also the broader medical professions recognizing the magnitude of those challenges as well. And when we listen to chief medical advisors saying, do you know what, if we don't do something different, then the generation who are in their 20s now might not be able to have hip replacements because we won't have drugs that can control post-operative infections. I think that hits across into our sector as well. And I think it's absolutely brilliant that Gwyn and others have really taken the initiative of that to capitalise on that awareness of the veterinary profession and of animal owners, that they need to do something different and help to provide a vehicle to do it. So I think what we're seeing is just a crystallization of a feeling that's been there for a while and now has an outlet through Ruma Companion Animal and Gwyn and others involved in that group.
Okay, thank you. And a follow-up question to you, Gwyn. That same BVA survey showed that 76% of companion animal vets say that their pet clients are not aware of the AMR issue. So what do you think the new companion animal Ruma can do to help raise pet owners' awareness?
Well, this is certainly a challenge, isn't it? And it's one we're going to have to take head on, that's for sure. And I think we'll need to employ everything we've learned already in the past few years of Ruma, but also appreciate that this is a very different sector. I thought actually that the general public at large had moved a long way on antimicrobials when it came to human medicines and demanding things where they didn't work or they weren't needed. But it does seem that when the companion animal is concerned, there is still huge pressures on vets to prescribe. And obviously, as I said earlier, when the companion animal is seen as a member of the family, it's very difficult. So I think that that makes it a more complex issue. But one way or another, as James says, this has to be tackled and we need to move on this. Otherwise, we will end up with some really difficult things for the future.
Okay, thank you. Kitty, could we just have a point of clarity from that's been raised from the audience? Several speakers have referred to HPCIAs, the highest priority critically important antibiotics. However, the EU Medical Agency list does not have the HPCIA category anymore. So is the UK following the World Health Organization critically important antibiotic list or the EU list?
Well, we're following the EU list as it was while we take a process of pausing to review exactly how we go forward with this. So we're essentially continuing the way we've classified them before on the basis that the WHO list is global and risk profiles vary globally. But we're looking more regionally.
Okay. And Chris, I'll come to you next. We've had a question submitted. Now, you did cover it off in your piece earlier, but I just think it's worth asking it again so that you can emphasise it, about whether there's a limit to the reductions in the use of antibiotics that can be achieved across the sectors.
Yeah, it's a good question, and certainly from our perspective, this is not a drive to zero use of antibiotics. We have to be able to use them in terms of maintaining animal health and welfare in UK food production. What we will see, though, is that sectors will get to a level where they maintain a sustainable use of antibiotics. And some sectors are already reaching that point. We mentioned the poultry sector that's been on this journey now for 10 years. Other sectors are still to get to that point. And how we define that, that's a point for discussion, but it's certainly not a race to zero use of antibiotics.
And Gwyn, will the companion animal side be following the same principle?
Yes, we will. Obviously, we will be working with our vets and vet practices very closely. We don't have professional farmers looking after animals. In this instance, we have owners and families with their pets, so it is quite different. But yes, I mean, we certainly won't be looking for zero antibiotic. I think that's unrealistic and incorrect and has welfare implications across the board. But certainly, we'll be looking with Daniela's help to set targets and measures.
Okay, thank you. So this is obviously as well Antibiotics Awareness Week. And we've been asked what key messages is Ruma issuing during this week. So Chris, I will let you take this one on first.
Well, it's part of the reason we coordinated today's conference on European Antibiotic Awareness Day, in order to be able to share the messages and the successes and the work that has gone on within UK agriculture. But over the course of the next week, we'll just be amplifying those key messages that UK agriculture is taking a responsible approach to the AMR challenge. It's doing its bit to contribute to the One Health response to AMR. And we will be repeating those messages that you'll see in the breakout sessions over the slides, the 52% reduction in antibiotics in terms of use in animals over the last 5 years since 2014, the reduction in the use of those highest priority critically important antibiotics, which have gone down by 79%, and they represent just 5% of all the antibiotics used. So I think they're the key messages that we'd like to get across to everybody in terms of the UK's strong record in terms of reducing antibiotic use, but still maintaining the highest standards of animal health and welfare.
Kitty, from the VMD's point of view, when we were part of the European community, there used to be quite a lot of kind of government input into activities across Europe on EU Antibiotics Awareness Day. Is the VMD planning, kind of, what activities are you doing to promote it? And do you think you will keep on promoting this week and, kind of today as we go on in the next couple of years?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have. I mean, we've got some tweets coming out, and I know that the comms side of the team is coordinating across different organisations to make sure our messages are joined up. And I think that it's there's a couple of interesting things, isn't it? I think the messages, for me, a lot of the messages are actually the same messages. It's about maintaining the profile of them. The importance of World Antibiotic Awareness Week is that you do get a sort of a concentrated barrage of messages, and so some of them do get through. But of course, it's not just around World Antibiotic Awareness Week. It's also around trying to maintain that profile throughout the year, if at all possible. So I think the other thing is that in the past we've coordinated across government, and I think that of course a lot of those elements have been across the human health sides of government, and I think that has taken a slight backseat, certainly last year and possibly this year with the other things occupying health colleagues. But yeah, it's important to be part of the conversation, and certainly we're seeing that happening.
Okay. We've had a couple of questions come in about unintended release of veterinary medicines to the environment and any potential impacts. Now, obviously, farm animal medicines go through a strict environmental risk assessment prior to being placed on the market. So this is already considered by both market authorization holders and regulators before being placed on the market. And the environmental issues are an area of future attention for Ruma. But for now, James, I wonder, if you might like to kind of talk a little bit about it from a prescribing vet's perspective, so just kind of illustrate some of those decisions that you might make when you're actually on farm.
I think, whether we're talking about antimicrobials or other classes of drugs, this is just part of our thinking when we're considering reduction in overall usage. And I think a really obvious and really kind of good news story within that would be within the cattle sector, and thinking about selective dry cow therapy and the move that has been made over recent years from what I was taught as best practice when I was at university of every quarter of every cow every time receiving a dose of antibiotics, through to the much more stratified and strategic use. And I think part of that is a recognition that when you think that a number of those antibiotics are sort of excreted whole at the end of their period in the udder, that they may end up in the environment. Now that's different to inadvertent release into the environment. That would be more sort of consequential as a result of our usage. So I think in terms of that inadvertent use, that's where our awareness of what drugs have gone out, how they've been stored, how they've been used, becomes and forms such an important part of our health planning with those farms and the annual medicines review. And one of the reasons I think that we're so supportive of something like the Medicines Hub, to make sure that we can enable some of those best conversations to happen between farmers and vets on a regular basis, to ensure that everybody is playing their part, to make sure that we're not seeing waste drugs, for example, ending up inappropriately disposed of.
Okay, thank you. That's a nice little segue into some of the conversations around data, and and we've had some questions particularly about what will happen to the data once it's collected through the medicine hubs, with specific questions about whether it could be accessible to the general public or broken down to a regional or local basis. Now, I'm basically going to throw this open to all of you to get your individual perspectives, but I'll start, I think, with Chris, and just kind of let Chris kind of illustrate, kind of what he thinks about kind of data and how it could be used. Chris?
Yes, thanks, Kat. And apologies, everyone. I've had some feedback that perhaps my internet connection is not great this morning. I do live in a rural area. Fiber's a way off for us just yet. I think the key thing here in terms of, I'll speak predominantly for the pig and the ruminant sectors, which use the AHDB, eMedicine Book and eMedicine Hub. The farmer's in control of that data. That's the key message that I want everybody to understand. If the farmer chooses to share that data with his vet, or potentially with the people he supplies products to, that's the farmer's choice. From our perspective, we're interested in the data to give us an indication of the national picture. So that's the key thing in terms of all of that data being crunched together and brought in from other data sources. As Mark shared with us in terms of the Medicine Hub, there are already supply chains and vet practices out there that have collected that data, and the eMedicine Hub is hopefully a tool that we can use to bring all that data together and allow us to see it in one picture. Moving forward, I would like to think that farmers can access data within things like the Medicine Hub to benchmark themselves and have discussions with their vet to see their enterprise measured against other enterprises to see how they're performing, because that's good business. That's good business practice to use different parameters, be it costings or be it your financial data or your medicine use data, to compare your performance and stimulate discussions about how you improve your enterprise. So just to go back to my first point, the key thing here is the farmer is in charge of that data and he controls who can see it.
And thanks, Chris. I'll come to Kitty now. From a regulator's point of view, what's the benefit of all this data for you, and how will you need it? What will you need?
Well, it's an interesting point to refer to us as a regulator, which of course we are, but we are in this instance, this is very much actually where we find this. First things first, we only need the data at an aggregated and anonymized level when it comes to what we use it for. So for us, at our level, the importance is to be able to look at national trends in different sectors and to pick out where those trends are changing and in what direction. And for us, it's really important to use that to help us to find out whether the policies that we're putting in place are actually having the effect that we were hoping that they would have. So that's really where we come in. That said, when you look at it from the policy perspective, for me, I mean, data is it's absolutely crucial. I think that if you don't have data, then you're doing everything in the dark. You don't know whether what you're doing is working. And so I spoke about that in the VMD's context, but actually it's exactly what Chris was saying in terms of how it's used on farm. And so I think for me, the importance of data is there at pretty much every level, whether that's farmer, whether that's vet, whether that's processors, whether that's retailers, sectors. I mean, it has different levels at different points, and on what data should be accessible, I would say, point of principle, the minimum amount that's necessary to be able to use it for what you need. And if there's a point at which you start to infringe not personal data, but anything that could cause a problem, then that's where you have to sit down and have a really thorough look and work out what levels of permission you would actually need to do that. But bottom line, data is absolutely fundamental to making sure that what we're doing is actually on the right track.
Okay. James, can I come to you as a practicing vet on the ground? I mean, how will you use the data with your clients?
I often think, Kat, with something like this, that perhaps giving an analogy back into the human sector of where data is collected and how it's used, and then taking that back to how we think we might use this might be useful. And I've got 3 daughters who are at the age of making decisions about whether to have human papillomavirus vaccine. Now, there's no way that anyone else in my street, in my town, in my country will know whether or not my daughters have had the HPV vaccine. But what we can do is know that what the percentage of children receiving that vaccine are, across the whole country, and then we as a household can make a judgment based on that data as to whether we're sort of above, below, or around about on the trend. And I would take that back to our farm situation and say, look, this is about who's going to access the data. So I think it's absolutely right that farmer and vet working together to achieve health and welfare on that farm should have access to not just what's happening on that farm, but potentially being able to benchmark that against a national picture. But absolutely what I wouldn't expect would be able to sit down with a farmer and say, do you know what your neighbour's using? That wouldn't be right at all. And that's not where I see any of us anticipating going with this. So having that nationally collected data provides a baseline for us to work with each individual farmer from, and to be able to try and establish if someone is an outlier, why are they an outlier? What are they doing that's different to the national picture? And how can we work together to improve that? And I think that's how we continue to see the sort of incremental gains that we've had over the last few years.
Okay, Chris, you want to come back in?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on that point that James made. In some sectors, like the ruminant sectors, we've still got some way to go in terms of building that national picture, and that's where the e-medicine hub hopefully can play a part. But we've already learned lessons from the pig industry where those conversations, exactly as James just explained, where the farmer's collected his data, he or the vet has inputted that data, and that's provided a base for a really good, practical and meaningful discussion between the vet and the client in terms of the health and the health plan for that herd or that flock. So I think that's farmers shouldn't be afraid to share their data. They can share their data with the vet. It should perform a really important business tool for them going forward.
And Gwen, I was just want to bring you in because we've had a question about how the animal health and welfare pathway, which is being developed through industry and government co-design at the moment, might help encourage data collection and sharing, especially in the ruminant sector. Being someone who's very close to this, I wondered if you wanted to just comment on that.
Yes, thank you, Kat. I mean, I'd like to stray a little, if I may, and comment on all of this, because in the companion animal sector, we've got the two main databases. We've got really good data, and both those databases have joined our group. They put their competitive interests aside and joined our group, and that's a massive plus. When I look at agriculture, the HDB Medicine Hub was brought about under my chairmanship of the Dairy Board, as well as the Beef and Lamb Board. And I've stayed closely associated with it, and I've been working to try and help get it to work ever since. And it pains me somewhat when I look at the good data we have for dairy, that we are unable so far to transfer that data, bulk data, onto the hub, because unless we have proper data for each sector, that sector will suffer in terms of reputation, and it'll suffer when it comes to competition from imports and the ability to export. So there's some different dynamics at play here, other than just the very useful and worthwhile ability to benchmark which farmers have. And we see from our colleagues in Wales, who are actually well ahead of us with data, and Iestyn was on earlier, they are already, they've already got a very good database, and they're very keen to put their data on our hub, because they see that Welsh data on its own isn't as valuable as when it's put in with everyone else's. So I think these lessons need to be learned, and I think it's really important that we get the messages across. I think that's quite important. As far as the pathway is concerned, we will be asking farmers to put their medicine data on the hub. I think it'll be voluntary initially, and then hopefully that will encourage farmers to do that. And I think it's really important that we get the right messages across as to how important this is. And at the same time, as many have said, safeguarding and being able to demonstrate that that data goes nowhere else without their explicit permission. I think that's really important. And that is, of course, how it's been set up. HDB is a levy organisation which is there to serve farmers, and therefore it won't do anything with the data. It provides the tool, and it's for industry to then populate it.
And I'm quite conscious of time, but I think we've had a question come in as well. Are the panel worried about future availability of vaccines for the industry to further reduce antibiotic use? Working on the basis of prevention is always better than cure. Who wants to go with that one first? Kitty, do you want to talk about vaccines?
I can certainly say a few things about that, although it may be limited in terms of the source of the question. I mean, I think vaccine availability comes under the same things that I was talking about earlier with medicines availability. So I mean, in terms of the VMD's commitment to making sure that the medicines that are needed are available, then that applies just as much to vaccines as it does to antibiotics, and also the market forces that apply to whether or not something actually reaches the market. The return on investment that applies just as well to vaccines. I think there are definitely things that can be done, and task force and some of the work of the pathway to promote uptake of vaccines when it's not when in areas where it hasn't necessarily had such good uptake. But in terms of actual availability of vaccines, it depends on if that's availability in terms of supply issues. Then there's a VMD team who works with companies to help to try and unblock and resolve supply issues. If it's availability in terms of whether or not there exist marketing authorizations for specific vaccines, then that comes back to the things I talked about earlier.
Okay, and Chris, I think it's one thing I'm very conscious with Ruma, that we are not just all about antibiotics. So I wonder if you want to expand a little bit on how vaccines fits into the whole responsible use agenda for Ruma.
Well, simple answer, Kat, is they play a very important part. It can be a complicated message because vaccines, it almost boils down to the individual farm situation and the diseases that farm is exposed to and suffers as to whether a vaccine would be a suitable solution to a potential problem. So we have tried to promote the general use of vaccines, but I think that's back to the conversation between the vet and the client in terms of what the challenges are on that farm. However, there are some important messages about what the responsible and good practice is in terms of using vaccines, good storage, making sure that fridges are kept at the right temperatures, and of course, making sure that the proper dose is given to the animals at the right time. So in short, they provide a valuable tool to the industry across all of the sectors pretty much in terms of ensuring healthy, safe animals, and ultimately hoping that we avoid a situation where an antibiotic or another intervention might be required.
Okay. Gwen and James, do you want to come in? Is there anything that you want to add to that discussion, James?
I think there's just two things I would add in. I guess one is I wonder whether some of that question is a very short-term question, which has been around cat vaccines in the lead up to the end of this year, and where we know there have been some supply challenges. And I'm confident from the messages that I've had back that between the profession and the cat owning public that we've been able to manage that in the best possible way we can do to minimise any risk to to cat health. So I wonder if there was any of that behind that question. The other thing I would just do though is to reinforce what Chris has just said. I think before we think about any kind of future vaccines or different vaccines, let's really have a push to make sure that what we've got available to us is being used in the best possible way. I think it was Nottingham released a study towards a decade ago now that showed 27% of vaccine was going into animals in the way that it was intended to go in. And I think we're asking a lot of vaccine if we only put 27% of it in the way that we intend it to go in. So all of those things Chris has said, yes, please, and let's make sure we're doing them really well.
Okay, thank you. Just checking. Right, we've had a couple of probably more statements, but it's just probably quite important to say. One, there is a plea from the floor to stop talking about drugs. We should be talking about medicines, that drugs have a very negative connotation, and I think that's absolutely true. There's some agreement about the confidentiality of farmer data. So, again, that is something that we are absolutely all very much alive to. We've had a question on how do you benchmark without somebody knowing what your neighbours are using? I think that's probably just down to the parameters that we use for our benchmarks. So if you've only got kind of a very small sample to benchmark against, then you don't do it. You wait until you've got a big enough sample that you can then kind of make it anonymous. I can't say that word. So I think we've probably got to the end of our main kind of themes of questions. I just want to acknowledge as well that we've had some people that some of the live session dropped out for some people. So really sorry about that. And we will kind of make sure that the stream is available to watch again. So as I say, really sorry about that. It's just technology, I'm afraid. So I think we've actually clawed back a little bit of time. I don't think there's, just seeing them down my list.
Kat,
we've had one. Hang on, Chris. We've had one question. Does Ruma cover medicines use in fish farms? Yes, we absolutely do. Chris, do you want to just kind of quickly pick up a little bit on salmon and trout?
Yeah, absolutely. So the simple answer to the question is yes, we do. We have representatives from the salmon and the trout sectors separately because of their slightly different sort of production cycles and systems. And they're as committed as all of the other sectors are in terms of the responsible use of all medicines, but in particular antibiotics. And they are featured in our Target Task Force report, the progress report, which was published just 2 weeks ago. A quick plug, Kat, you can find that on rumour.org.uk. Kat, I was just going to come back to your comment about the recordings. All of this, one of the advantages of doing this online today is that we have recorded everything. And if you have experienced a momentary dropout, all of the recordings will be placed live online on our events page. I will endeavour to send everybody a link who's booked a ticket via the booking process to let you know when those sessions go live. They'll be split into sessions, so hopefully digestible for everybody to enjoy.
Okay, thank you. So I think we can probably wrap this session up. Thank you everyone for all your questions. If I've missed any or I haven't kind of answered them, then I'm sorry, we will try and get back to some of them. And you know, kind of it is quite challenging trying to keep track of them all. I hope you'll agree the morning has been thought-provoking. And just to recap before we break for lunch, we've heard all about the positive story of responsible use in UK farming. We've learned about the new Ruma companion animal and equine group, and we've also had insightful discussion looking ahead to the UK animal medicines legislation.